You see me rolling, we hating, controlling, and trying to catch me riding dirty, riding dirty. Gonna catch me riding dirty, catch me riding. Ladies and gentlemen,
I'm here at Cosmoverse and in the lovely
Medellin.
in the back of the hotel. So I thought we'd do some interviews out here today, and I'm here with Ethan Buckman. Bucky.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's been a long time since we've had one of these conversations.
Oh yeah.
I think the last one was probably in 2016 or something.
Wow. I was a little baby.
Yeah, just a little baby Ethan. Yeah.
Didn't even have a beard.
Rapping with the with the toy mic. Yeah. So how you been?
I've been amazing. I mean, we built this whole Cosmos thing, and it's happening.
It's happening.
Yeah.
It really feels like it's happening. It feels like it's happening even more now after what was announced here this morning.
After today, yeah.
After
Could be, yeah.
So you gave this talk this morning, and I thought it was really interesting because it sort of reinvigorated the Cosmos vision.
Oh yeah.
Right? And maybe set some new goals and some new directions.
Yeah.
But tell us a bit about these three phases that
Yeah. So, I was thinking about the larger arc of the story that's happening here and what it means to have shipped the white paper, and that was complete sometime in 2021, but completing the white paper didn't quite make the interchain pop yet. It took a little bit for chains to start coming online and start using IBC, and obviously Osmosis played a big role in that, and all the other chains that have been launching. And so, reflecting on sort of where we are and what's been happening and what we've been doing institutionally in Cosmoverse and some of the announcements and the new Cosmos Hub white paper, it sort of made me realize that the end of a phase, we had kind of completed the end of the first phase, and we were on the precipice of a new phase, and I wanted to try to understand, the broader picture of what that looked like and what, a potential third phase was going to be. And so the reflections I offered were that, there's three phases of Cosmos. So we just completed the initiation phase.
Yeah.
We're entering into what we might call the integration phase,
Mm-hmm.
which will be followed ultimately at some point in the future, we don't know when, by the illumination phase, right?
Yeah.
And different things, we completed a lot of things in the initiation phase that sort of transformed the way people think about blockchains, proved the Cosmos thesis, application-specific blockchains, IBC, all this good stuff. And now we're moving into the initiation or integration phase where we need to sort of cope with and wrestle with the complexity of this thing we've given birth to, right? So now we have this interchain, we have this community computing technology. Now what are we going to do with it, right? Do we just keep cruising along, or are there more challenges ahead? And so I outlined some of the challenges I think we need to address moving into the integration phase. And at a high level, the way I positioned that in the talk, they were one, improving our social coordination, improving our ability as a highly decentralized community to work together, to coordinate, to continue to evolve our public goods. Two, to develop a strong Cosmos Hub, to be a leader in the interchain, to help take the interchain to the next level. That's what the new white paper is about as well. And then three, to start preparing for the illumination phase, which is, in some sense where we prove that we're mature enough to actually be taken seriously in the halls of the institutions that dominate our societies, and which we ultimately need to upgrade if we're going to get towards a more sustainable civilization.
Yeah, I think this was the thing that really inspired me the most about the talk, is when you're talking about, you said, we're not competing against other blockchains, we're competing against traditional institutions, and
that's right.
Political institutions. And what types of institutions are you thinking about specifically here? What are the things that you think Cosmos can bring, or the interchain can bring to these institutions in terms of governance, public goods, infrastructure, funding and backing, and what's your vision for the illumination that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, one way I think about it is we're on the verge of a kind of constitutional transformation, right? The last one maybe happened a couple hundred years ago when nation states were born and started to be formalized, and all kinds of new legal structures and institutions came together to create, this new concept of the nation state, right? And the internet kind of kicked off really in earnest the end of the nation state, right? It sort of eroded its boundaries in fundamental ways that they're still grappling with and somewhat in denial of. And I think the vision of Cosmos and the ideas I've kind of always espoused about stakeholders and state machines and representing, citizenry within the state machines of society is to push towards more localized, more decentralized state structures. And that might emerge, or I think that might emerge in the form of municipal sovereignty and seeing, this movement from the nation state towards the city state as sort of a renewed locus of political autonomy and political economic, constitutional structure. And I'm hoping that Cosmos is actually going to enable that to happen, and that the result of that will be, greater representation of a greater group of people, that people feel more trust and legitimacy in their institutions, and that thereby, we'll be able to build more sustainable systems around that.
Yeah, and I mean, this makes a ton of sense, I think, for like a lot of us who are in the space here and who've been like thinking about these things for a while. But this is a drastic transformation, and I think as drastic as this transformation that existed 300, 400 years ago or whatever, like when democracies started to form and nation states started to form around constitutions.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a lot of hurt before, for change to happen? Often, there has to be chaos. And what kind of time frames are you thinking about here? And like, what's the amount of pain that society might suffer in order to like emerge on the other side with like more better, perhaps a better system. Yeah. I mean, it's a good, deep, difficult question. My agent might be a little frustrated that you're giving it to me, but she's not here right now, is she? So, I mean, worst case scenario is we go through nuclear war. I mean, that's a very real possibility. It's on the horizon. I mean, Putin's threatening it right now. I mean, there's a lot of potential hurt. That hurt is not coming because, a bunch of renegade technologists are saying, let's transform the state and let's build city-states. That is not where the hurt is coming from. The hurt is coming from, years and years, decades, if not centuries of institutional neglect, of underrepresentation of citizenry, of, a sort of amalgamation of interests of power, right? That have misrepresented the actual substructure of the natural and social world that we're embedded in, or that we are essentially, and that has consequences, and that's bubbling up, and how that bubbles over and the pain we go through. I mean, hopefully it's as little pain as possible. All change is painful in some way, but the short-term future is a little bit scary. Like, institutions are breaking down. I don't think we've ever quite grappled with the failure that was the financial crisis 2007 and 8. In some sense, we're still reeling from that, and the issues that came up there were never really addressed, and huge swaths of the population have already gone through significant hurt just from that thing alone, and that's probably gonna get worse. Lord knows we're on the precipice of some other financial crisis or something, right? So it could be pretty scary, but I'm hoping for the best, at least. One thing that I often think about when contemplating about what we're building here, and is there is a real risk, I think, that what we're building actually just exacerbates or recreates existing structures, but worse, right? So in terms of like governance, where I'm in Cosmos governance, but like I barely have time to look at like all the governance proposals going through. And governance proposals are fairly, simple now, right? Like, but there is a point, I think, when the governance that's happening at the protocol level will be so far removed from anybody using the system. And, lots of people are thinking about building sub-DAOs and maybe some sort of like political structures, but ultimately, validators have a ton, also have a ton of power. And the disconnect between those who are nearest to the chain and producing blocks and participating in governance, and those who are using the systems is quite far removed. And so I worry that these systems of inequality, but not just like wealth inequality, but information inequality that exists in the real world, may be replicated,
maybe exacerbated,
replicated,
sure.
exacerbated. So like where do we go from here in order to not do that?
No, I deeply share this concern.
Like, we've already seen like the worst of finance, I think, like kind of play itself out in crypto.
I mean, I write about this a little bit, that like the biggest threat to what we're doing is that we just get co-opted by Wall Street. And in some sense, all of DeFi is angling for that. It's like, hey, Wall Street, we can just do you, but better. Like, come play with less rules, right? And that's not the message I'm trying to advocate for, or the kinds of system I'm trying to build. I'm very afraid that, you know, if we don't actually take finance seriously, take the, you know, power seriously, capital as power seriously, then we're just going to rebuild these existing systems and exacerbate. And, you know, proof of stake is interesting in that regard, because it was an important step to be able to experiment with these kinds of technologies more sustainably and more securely than we could if every new chain had to secure itself using proof of work. But I don't think, you know, proof of stake is by any means the final state. Or even potentially, you know, a permanent state. It's a transitional state, right? And so I think we need to move beyond these pure kind of proof of stake mechanisms to other kinds of accountability systems that are more grounded in the real world. And how we do that remains somewhat of an open question. And people are, you know, are afraid of, you know, censorship and all these kinds of things. But what you're talking about, the native, you know, information asymmetries and even fees in some sense are a form of censorship, right? But we talk about censorship in a kind of very refined, narrow, specific way. Yeah. But really, what we care about is access. Yeah. Right. And censorship is a proxy for well, do people have access if they want it, right? Yeah. And not the whole world can't have access to a single computing system. I mean, that's just not feasible. And that was kind of the, you know, core insight of Cosmos. So we can't build a world computer, right? And so what do we do about that? Well, we have to build many computers, community computers, and give communities the ability to express themselves and express their values. And we will still have to do a lot of work to figure out, you know, where proof of stake kind of goes from here and how it continues to evolve. You know, I've offered in the past this idea that, you know, that there's a trajectory of going from the sort of global, anonymous, somewhat objective proof of work down towards more subjective and local forms of verification and of work, you know, starting with proof of stake, but maybe onto proof of bandwidth and ultimately things like proof of care or proof of plant, if you will, right? I think that's kind of the direction we have to go to really ground these systems in the real world. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Let's maybe just bring it back to let's ground ourselves into things that are concrete here for a second.
Touch grass.
Yeah, you talked about the ICF sort of reinventing itself, and one of the things that you mentioned here is that you had to upgrade the ICF, that it needed better forms of coordination, more transparency. There's this technical advisory board. Yeah. What's the reasoning behind this, and what do you see here as, like, what should we expect the ICF to look like in a year or two, or what will be its role in the ecosystem?
For sure. So, I mean, the ICF is committed to being a long-term institution, to being here to steward this ecosystem and this new technology for the long term. And so, to do that, it sort of needs to change the way it operates a little bit and you know, professionalize. And there's, you know, Cosmos has a kind of complex history, and we're in the process of telling the story of that history. We recently published you know, part 1 of a blog post, we could say, but it gets a little bit more complicated in part 2.
Really? I didn't see this.
You didn't see the history? Okay, yeah.
No, I'll have to go read this.
It's good. Yeah,
I'm very interested in this in this complex.
Yeah. So everyone, you know, there's a little bit of lore. It's a little bit mythological, and that's fine. That's good. So we don't want to you know, spoil the rainbow or something, but. But, you know, the ICF found itself in a position where, you know, a level of complexity was kind of thrust on it, and it's been sort of trying to deal with that, right? And it's been a slow process, but it feels like we've turned a corner. And you know, September 2022, this whole transition phase I'm talking about, from initiation to integration, you know, there's the ICF is part of that as well, and changes at the ICF are part of that, and you know, staffing the ICF in a new way, kind of properly, and you know, building up a proper management team and so on in a way we haven't been able to do in the past, and you know, renewing the delegation program and all these sorts of things, and then taking a more you know, integrated and longer term approach to funding the public goods. And bringing in, you know, leaders from across the community for this new technical advisory board to be part of that, and just to be, you know, more engaged with the community, get the transparency program going again, like, and to really be a beacon of, you know, nonprofit stewardship of an ecosystem, and to, you know, encourage and coordinate others to kind of step up and participate in this. I mean, we have such a massive ecosystem at this point. There's so many communities involved, and you know, so the ICF is sort of recognizing that and sort of welcoming everyone in to say, okay, how do we all work together to take everything to the next phase, to get us through, you know, the difficult processes of integration, this, you know, complex, highly decentralized community of development teams, of individuals, of blockchains, of organizations, and so on, to take us through, you know, to what we need to do throughout integration.
But concretely,
Uh-huh.
what's that going to look like? I mean, like, I think like one of the things that I've certainly experienced and heard a lot of other people also like talk about is the complexity of the organization and navigating the different parts of the organization as someone who is looking for either support or
Exactly,
these sorts of things, and like also transparency about what the ICF is working on or doing.
Exactly.
Or I think that's been sort of the gripe that a lot of the community has had. Are you addressing those things directly, or how are you addressing those things?
Well, I mean, the plan is by bringing in more project leaders to be part of technical and market strategy for the ICF, to be part of guiding the ICF's treasury, and of bringing in funding from additional sources to complement the funds that the ICF is deploying, and so that can all be done in a more transparent way, in a way that's more engaged with the wider community, so that there's more voices that are sort of part of that process. All of that is sort of happening, and then to also, just like you're saying, set up a better, we could call it like an indexing system to find things in Cosmos and orient and sort of clear through, make it easy for people to sort of get situated and discover different parts of the system and where they need to go and find support and things like that. These are exactly the things that we're working on.
Okay. Cool. And
let's.
I already did like a full 45 minutes with Zaki about Atom 2.0. Some we're not going to get deep into that, but what's the significance of this for you in realizing, this illumination goal?
I mean, I think this is a big step. We're attempting to reinvent a system at a level that I'm not sure has really been done before, and to transition the Cosmos Hub from a prototype of a new kind of approach to building and deploying blockchains to an actual meaningful application-specific blockchain in this new landscape it helped created as a vehicle to also transform it again towards the next stage. And we don't know exactly what needs to happen in the next stage, and the hub's role is going to have to continue to change. I have this long-term vision of the hub becoming effectively a cooperative of other chains, right? And Sunny sort of hinted at aspects of that in the mesh security, and that's those sorts of ideas. I sympathize with a lot, and especially cooperatives, multi-stakeholder cooperatives, and having the hub be able to work towards that sort of thing in the long term. And this idea of being able to run Tendermint over IBC, I mean, I see that as kind of the holy grail of the project, right? Once we got Tendermint over IBC, we could pack it in. I'm kidding, but that's how we know we've really built a proper internet. We can run a consensus protocol over it, at sort of a meta level, and have a new blockchain that sort of represents that higher order thing. So I think that's the kind of thing we're working towards over the long term. In the midterm, I think there's an opportunity for the hub to really come out as a leader, as preserving these sort of wider values of sovereignty and interoperability, of finding the right mix between taking care of itself and its community, but also supporting a much broader community of sovereign interoperable chains. And so that's going to be a really interesting space to navigate. And so I think it's got a really exciting future ahead as we build and develop new tools. And what I'm really interested in are how do we better specify and understand these systems? How do we understand the invariants they're supposed to uphold? How do chains offer guarantees over block space and over other kinds of execution and security properties? And everyone throws around the word security like it all like there's only one thing. Oh, security. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Like, no, everyone, you mean like 8 different things, if not more. And so starting to try to get a little clearer about what security means in different contexts and what kinds of security the hub might be providing or not, I think is going to be very interesting. So
well, for more on that, check out my other podcast with Zaki, where we dive deeper into the different parts of Atom 2.0. Thanks so much for doing this.
You got it, man. Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for chatting. Yeah,
thanks.